Welcome back to the BBC's special coverage of the US midterm elections 2018. If you're just joining us, our partner organisation, CBS News here in America, is projecting that Republicans have retained control of the Senate.
So to discuss, let's bring in our panel. The Republican strategist Mica Mosbacher is with us. She's on the Trump re-election campaign for 2020, and we're also joined by Emily Maitlis from the BBC's Newsnight programme. If we, as many are projecting, assume that the House is going to go to the Democrats tonight, Mica, how does President Trump deal with them?
Well, he's going to have to reach across the aisle, something that we haven't seen since probably Bush Sr.
Wow.
So this is otherwise, you know, we will be completely gridlocked in the House, and nothing will get passed. So for the good of America, especially in terms of health care, which is a #1 issue according to exit polls for many Americans, and also immigration, which is a big factor for Republicans. Both systems are broken, and they're going to have to come together and compromise, and I don't know where that is. I mean, obviously, even Trump has pledged that he would be all for making sure that those individuals with pre-existing conditions are protected in any kind of repeal and replace for Affordable Care Act. And by the way, that was a false narrative that the Democrats used, and it looks like they might have used it successfully. But and that was because there were members of the House who did vote against pre-existing conditions.
To be fair, there have been a few false narratives. For example, that the caravan of migrants is on America's doorstep when it's still a month or two away, and there may be much fewer of them than we thought. So the campaign has been full of some false narratives on both sides. That is the nature of politics. Donald Trump, Emily, is capable of doing a total bait and switch and deciding that actually he wakes up tomorrow morning and what he wants to be is the president who does compromise and reach across the aisle. He came into office in 2016 and we had many discussions about actually how conservative was Donald Trump. He's changed his positions on key issues, for example, abortion, for example, gun control. He is capable of saying on something like infrastructure, OK, you know what? I am going to work with Democrats and I'm going to get one big thing done.
I agree with you. He's not an ideologue. We know that. There are too many different thought patterns going on at the same time for there to be one clear line of vision. But I don't think, I don't share Mica's vision that he's going to come in and say, let's start working with the Democrat, because he knows that his power comes from chaos, from dissent, from splitting things up, not bringing them together. And I think one of the questions which is most interesting, if the House goes one way and the Senate goes another, is that the House is more representative of the US population in terms of the number of people. The Senate represents more of these smaller, rural, more Republican states more equally. So the question is, at what point do you say the House actually should have more of the power to start making decisions because it actually represents more American people?
Except you have the Senate to consider.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but the Senate, as we know, represents, you know, because each Senate has 2 senators.
We're going to hold you both there because we want to fit in. We have a 5-minute window with a line to Nevada, and we want to go there and speak to CBS News is our partner organisation. CBS News is Jamie Yuccas out in Nevada, where there is an interesting Senate race. Jamie, things have not gone well for the Democrats so far in the Senate. How is it looking there in Nevada?
Well, I can tell you I'm at the Democratic headquarters here in Nevada. Polls closed about 40 minutes or so ago, and you can see the room is empty. This was a strategy by the Democrats to keep as many volunteers out at the polls as possible, because even though polls closed, as long as people were in line at the 172 statewide precincts, they will get to vote if they were in line at closing time. So it's anybody's guess as to how that will turn. It's been a very contentious race here, one that people across America have been watching very, very closely. Democrat Jackie Rosen is the Democrat here who has been out campaigning. She, the last couple days, has been on a nonstop tear of trying to get out the union vote, trying to get out the youth vote. She's put out ads in both English and in Spanish, and she's taking on the current incumbent senator, Dean Heller. Now, the interesting part about that senator, Dean Heller, is that just a few years ago, he said that he did not like President Donald Trump's policies. He was not going to go in lockstep with him. He even gave back a campaign contribution at one point. And now, when it comes to the Affordable Care Act, he actually flip-flopped and originally said that he wasn't going to vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and then did. And since then, he's been out and had President Donald Trump and President Donald Trump's children come and campaign with him in the state. So we've seen some more low-key, kind of shaking hands, kissing babies type of campaigning from the Republican Dean Heller over the last couple of days, on top of those big rallies with the president. And really, he has aligned himself with that. So here we're watching at the Democratic headquarters to see what happens with Jackie Rosen's campaign. We know from visiting the University of Nevada, Las Vegas campus that the liberal Get Out the Vote groups were very active. They were able to have a lot of voter turnout, young voter turnout on campus after having a polling place open there for 3 days during early voting. Students today did have to leave campus, but a lot of those organizations were organizing rides. Also here in this country, 3% of voters said in the last election that they didn't make it out to the polls because they didn't have transportation. So here in Nevada, there was a big push by Uber and Lyft to get people out to the polls here to make sure that everyone's vote counted. I can tell you, after visiting a number of polling places today, that voting did go very smoothly in Nevada. They had 2 weeks of early voting. 30% of voters got their votes in either by absentee or early votes ahead, and that is in comparison to 2014, when only 20% of statewide votes were in at that point in time. And today, those 172 precincts, the biggest cities here in Nevada, Las Vegas and Reno, the counties that house those two largest cities, people could vote at any of the voting centers that were open there. So things ran very, very smoothly. We're just now waiting to see how the results come in, and people very curious to see, even though the Republicans will likely remain in control of the Senate, if Democrats can flip this one seat with Jackie Rosen here in Nevada.
Jamie Ucas there in Nevada. Thank you very much. Interesting, because Dean Heller is the only Republican senator running in a state that was
Clinton
taken by
won.
Clinton.
Yeah.
He was polling as a very vulnerable candidate.
Yeah.
We're +1 in the studio. Doug Thornell is with us. He's a managing director of SKD Knickerbocker. Democratic strategist. Welcome. Let's just talk about Nevada since you're here. Your timing is great, because Nevada, there's been some talk about the Californication of Nevada, that it's becoming one of those states that is starting to turn towards Democrats.
Yeah, well, look, I think if you can go back to when Harry Reid ran for re-election, I think that was in 6 or 8 years ago. That was supposed to be a really tough race. He was able to win that. It's always a state, though, that is decided by 1 or 2 or 3 points. So it's a very close, it's always a close state. I think we're going to probably see that with Jackie Rosen and Dean Heller. I expect that at the end, though, that I think Rosen will pull it out. But
it's one of those states as well where, and we've not talked a lot tonight about the Hispanic vote, where the Hispanic vote is really important. I read a fact the other day in the New York Times that 60% of Hispanics in the United States have not been contacted by a campaign. And you look at Nevada, it's one of those states where if you just had a rise in the Hispanic vote from about 14 to 17%, it would make all the difference to Jackie Rosen.
Yeah, it's going to make, and I know a lot of people who worked on that campaign, a lot of the strategists, and that was a big part of their campaign, which was to communicate, organize, mobilize, and turn out the Hispanic vote in Nevada. And so, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to decide the outcome for them, but that was a huge part of Jackie Rosen's campaign. That was a huge part of what the DSCC was investing in, what the Nevada Democratic Party was investing in.
Don't forget,
Mica, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say Tim Kaine 2 years ago. I mean, one of the most salient factors that everyone was repeating was that he was a fluent Spanish speaker and he'd worked as a missionary. And it was exactly to get the Latinos, the Hispanic vote. People might be more religious than the traditional sort of progressive Democrats that Hillary represented. That was his sort of his USP as the running mate.
So, Mica, the poll numbers from 2016 are a little confusing on this because some people have suggested that Hispanics voted, 30% of Hispanics voted for President Trump. Other people have said it's much more like 18 to 20% of Hispanics who voted for President Trump. Hispanics groups are putting it at the lower end of that. But there is certainly a possibility, and George W. Bush knew this from your state, knew this. There is a possibility for Republicans to not just get, it's not important just that they get to the polls, but to actually get them to vote Republican.
Well, absolutely. And that has been an issue, and I would probably agree with you that it was on the lower end.
Yeah.
Probably I've heard between 22% and 25% for 2016. I will say that the Republican Party has failed in the past to reach out to Hispanic
Apart
voters.
from George W. Bush.
He was the
exception.
because John McCain, there are many factors why he lost, but one of them was he failed to reach out to the Hispanic vote. And my husband, who was general chairman of the McCain campaign at the time, was pushing the campaign chairman and other strategists to reach out to the Hispanics, and they failed to do it. So, I mean, they are an important and often overlooked voting bloc.
And they are now the biggest minority in the United States.
And also demonized. I mean, don't forget that. You know, it is whenever Donald Trump is trying to talk about, you know, Mexicans, talk about Hondurans, talk about the people coming in, that is not a great way to get the Latino vote on your side.
So
That is a good point, Emily.
Yeah, and look, I think that surprisingly, in Florida, I'm working in a race in Florida, and if you look at Rick Scott and how his campaign has been running their outreach to Hispanics, it actually has been pretty impressive in terms of, I generally don't give a lot of credit to Republicans, but I will say that he was running advertisements from the start in Spanish,
and that could make a difference because he's
makes a
just
huge
an
difference.
And
he was appealing to Puerto Ricans, Venezuelans. Obviously, Republicans typically do well with Cubans. So, you know, at the end of the day, I don't know if they've called Florida's Senate race or governor's race yet, but I actually think Florida in particular is going to be one of the states that Democrats need to take a hard look at and figure out what they could have done better, because I think the Hispanic vote there is going to go probably, I mean, we're going to win. Democrats are going to win that, but not by the margins that we needed to.
Okay, let's go to somebody who knows a lot about Hispanic votes. Javier Becerra is the current Attorney General of California. He joins us live now from Los Angeles. Mr. Attorney General, thank you. We've spoken to you many times, Christian and I, on our program. It's great to have you back on the program tonight on this midterm special, picking up on that conversation you've just been listening to about Hispanic votes. How much of an issue is it in those districts in California that we're going to be watching, where we have Republican candidates in office, but in districts that Hillary Clinton won? How much is the Hispanic vote an issue there?
Caddy, the Latino vote could be decisive in those districts. The issue will be, can we animate them and get them out to vote? That's always been the issue. You have to make this appealing. You have to make them understand that this could be consequential to their lives, because so often the impact of a politician has never seemed to quite reach home. And so it's a matter of convincing folks that it's in their interest to get out and vote. If we do that,
Javier,
we win big.
I've been hearing this from Democrats for, I think now, 3 or 4 election cycles, basically ever since George W. Bush and 2004 and John Kerry. And Democrats keep saying this: we're going to get the Hispanic vote. Our party is going to have an inexorable majority in the United States because of Hispanics. And it still doesn't happen. What is so difficult for the Democrats about reaching out to Hispanic voters? Why are they failing to do it in a way that actually gets them to the polls?
So let's clear the decks and understand the Latino vote and what we're facing in the U.S. in terms of that political block of votes. One, nearly a third of Latinos in this country are, in many cases, not yet eligible to vote, either because they're still very young, we're a very young demographic, or because they're not yet U.S. citizens. Some are legal permanent residents, many are undocumented. So you have to discount a large percentage of the Latino population before you can start talking about eligible voters. But two, remember that Democrats have been, over the last several elections, getting some 70 to 75% of the Latino vote already. It's a good portion. We just have to make it 70 to 75% of the majority of those who are Latinos and eligible to vote, not 70 or 75% of 50% of those who could vote. That's our task, is to communicate to Latinos that it is in their interest to get out and vote, because they may not be wealthy. but their vote is precious, and it is their voice.
Javier, while we've got you, we should plug into what is going on in California. Polls, when do the polls close? In about, what, another 15 minutes, probably? What do you expect out of those tightly fought congressional districts tonight?
Christian, I think California will pull its weight when it comes to getting good, talented leaders coming out of California to go to Washington, D.C. to serve in the House. We will continue to have a legislature which is very blue. We'll have a strong governor in Gavin Newsom. I think up and down California, you will see that Democrats have convinced our population of almost 40 million people that we're going to go forward. We're a forward-leaning state. We don't want to backslide the way we see in Washington, D.C. And so while California may seem like it's sometimes going on its own, at the end of the day, what California does, the rest of the nation, and in many respects, the rest of the world, will follow.
And of course, tomorrow morning, the focus will be on the Californian Nancy Pelosi, who I know is not near you. She's here in Washington because she was in the hairdresser with Cathy this morning here in D.C. So why is she here, and is she going to be the Speaker of the House?
Nancy Pelosi is being Nancy Pelosi. She's preparing. Nancy Pelosi prepares for everything. She's looking at an opportunity to be, once again, the Speaker of the House, lead a majority of Democrats in the House, to finally get some work done, to finally provide the check and balance that the founders of our nation expected out of Congress when it came to the excesses of an executive that runs amok. And so I think Nancy Pelosi is getting ready to get to work right after this election.
Okay, Javier Becerra, thank you so much, Mr. Becerra, Attorney General of California, for joining us. We'll see you back on 100 Days in the weeks coming up. Great to have you on the programme.
It is a night of firsts.
Yeah, and can I just come in with a quite interesting number of firsts? Of the 14 House seats, this is CNN calling it so far, that have flipped for the Democrats, 10 of those are women. Now, it's quite interesting. We knew there was this record number coming in. I think you would talk about the figure earlier, Cathy, 260, 261 women standing, a record number. And of their successes tonight for the Democrats, 10 out of the 14 are women. So that may well be the story that we are looking at going forward, whether it's women voting for women, whether it's women standing in House races that were attracting the kind of women that didn't want to go for Trump anymore, and what's happening there.
We are nearly at the top of the hour. It's time to check in with Anthony Zerka. And Anthony, an hour has gone by. I can't believe an hour has gone by. It feels like 5 minutes. What have you been watching over the last hour? How have things changed for you? What's your takeaway?
Okay, well, things seem to be breaking pretty much the way we thought they would as far as the House goes. Leaning Democrat seats go to the Democrat, leaning Republican seats go to the Republican. Independents fall either way. There's one that's defying expectations, though. That's Staten Island in New York. Dan Donovan, the Republican, has managed to win that seat several times now. Looks like he may be about to lose to Max Rose. That's a surprise. People thought he was going to hang in. Staten Island was a Trump-friendly area of New York. So that is the one, let's say, a bit of a shocker in the House of Representatives so far.
And also New Jersey 11, they're saying, and that's been in Republican hands for an awful long time.
Right, although that had been one that I think people thought was going to be swinging. This one, Dan Donovan, he was a survivor. People had a big target on his back in 2016, and he managed to prevail. So not a lot has been truly shocking. That, if it holds up, would be one of them.
OK, Anthony Zerka, thank you very much. We will check back in with you in another hour. Doug Thornell, it is nearly 11 o'clock on the east coast of the United States. That means it is 8 o'clock in the evening in California. Polls are now starting to close right across the country. What's your takeaway at this point in the evening?
Well, look, I think it's been a good night for Democrats in the House. I think this is going to be the hour when likely it will be official that Democrats win back the House. I think there were some disappointing...
Any sense of the margin?
You know, I think I thought we were going to get around 230, 232 in terms of the number of seats that we would represent. And I think that there were some disappointing outcomes for us in the Senate and gubernatorial races. But overall, I think that Democrats have to feel good about this. Look, we walked into this election on the Senate side. This was a killing fields for Democrats in terms of the overall Senate map. It was a terrible map for us. It's a map that we, going into 2020, we're not going to have to deal with. We had to defend a bunch of races in red districts, Trump districts. we were able. I think we're going to probably walk out of there with maybe a -1, -2, and then, quite frankly, in the House, like if you were to tell me 18 months ago that we were going to have an opportunity to win the House, I would have said, okay, what are you smoking? You know, I mean, quite frankly, I think there was a.
And Mica, you'll be equally happy tonight because it's looking as if the Republicans have held the Senate.
You mean it's a night where everyone's going to be happy?
Everyone's going to be happy.
Yes, and we're looking to see if we picked up a couple of seats, which would be historical, because we haven't picked up extra seats in the Senate since 1962.
Yeah, and you can bet you that Donald Trump's going to claim the victory for that. He's not going to own the Democrat lot.
But the fact is, he lost. I mean, he's ultimately going to lose 24, 25, 26, 27, maybe 30 House seats. So that's not insignificant, right?
Well, Clinton lost 54 House seats in 1996.
We're going to let Emily go. She's got a Newsnight special.
And that wasn't good either. I mean, I wasn't happy about that.
If I don't let Emily go to bed, she's got a Newsnight special.
The one thing
tomorrow.
I learnt, and I think this takes us back very briefly to 2016. In 2016, anyone on the campaign had to learn to listen to the noise. You started off with 2 candidates, and you learned to listen to the noisier campaign. This time, the thing I've learned is that it's not always the noise telling you the proper picture. When we talk to women in very close suburban, sort of college-educated places around Virginia, sometimes it's what they're not saying rather than what they're saying.
It is not always the noise. Women keep it quiet, but they have an impact. Emily Maitlis, Mica Mosbacher, Doug Thornell, thank you very much for joining us. Stay with us. We'll have much more to come, coming back at the top of the hour.